The crisp, cold air of Arlington National Cemetery was heavy with sorrow, the overcast sky mirroring the grief of those gathered. Rows of uniformed soldiers stood at solemn attention, their medals gleaming dimly under the gray light, their expressions grim. Folded American flag was clenched in the hands of a weeping widow, her fingers trembling as she clutched onto the last physical remnant of the man she had lost. Standing at the front, decorated in a pristine dress uniform, was General Nathaniel Carter, one of the highest ranking officers in the United States Army. His posture was rigid, his face unreadable behind dark aviators, his deep brown skin contrasting against the immaculate white of his gloves. He had seen battle, had commanded thousands, had witnessed the loss of soldiers under his leadership, but today was personal. The man being buried, Major William Daniels, had been more than a soldier. He had been a brother in arms, a friend, a man Carter had mentored from the time he was a fresh recruit to the moment he became a decorated officer. And now he was gone, taken by an ID in the heart of a foreign desert. The ceremony was nearly over. A 21 gun salute had echoed through the hills, the last note of the bugle had faded into the wind, and all that remained was the final farewell. Carter inhaled sharply, steeling himself as he prepared to step forward and pay his respects, and then it happened. A sharp, commanding voice sliced through the quiet. "Get down." "Hands where I can see 'em." A murmur of shock rippled through the crowd as heads whipped toward the source of the commotion. 2 uniformed police officers stood at the edge of the funeral gathering, their guns trained on General Carter. The younger officer, a fresh-faced recruit with nervous fingers twitching over his holster, looked uncertain. The older one, Sergeant Doug Harper, was a burly, middle-aged white man with a hardened scowl twisting his face. Carter didn't move. The mourners gasped. Soldiers exchanged stunned glances, some instinctively reaching for their holsters before realizing they were unarmed for the funeral. The widow of Major Daniels let out a horrified sob. Carter's voice was calm, measured, the voice of a man who had commanded troops under enemy fire. "What do you think you're doing?" he asked, his baritone as sharp as steel. Harper took a step closer, his finger dangerously close to the trigger. "I said hands up, now." The tension was suffocating. No one moved. The only sound was the wind rustling through the trees, the distant echo of boots shifting uneasily on the wet grass. Nathaniel Carter, 4-star general, combat veteran, war hero, stood unmoving. His expression didn't change. He had been in situations far more dangerous than this, but the sheer disrespect burning in Harper's gaze was something else. "You're making a mistake," Carter said simply, his voice unshaken. Harper's lip curled, his grip on the gun tightened. "Oh yeah, and what mistake is that?" Carter tilted his head, his voice quiet, almost dangerous, the kind that ends careers. But Harper didn't listen. The racist officer had no idea who he was dealing with, and he was about to learn the hard way. Gasps rippled through the mourners. The honor guard, composed of high-ranking officers and decorated soldiers, exchanged bewildered glances, their hands clenching at their sides. This wasn't some random civilian Harper was targeting. This was General Nathaniel Carter, one of the most respected military leaders in the country. And yet the officer's gun remained fixed on him, as if he were nothing more than a criminal. A slow, heavy silence fell over the cemetery, interrupted only by the rustling of leaves and the distant roll of thunder. Carter still hadn't moved. His chest rose and fell steadily, his broad shoulders squared as he stared down Sergeant Harper, who was growing red in the face. "I said, hands up." Harper barked again, his voice rising, filled with something deeper than authority. It was arrogance, it was bias, it was the belief that he had the power to do whatever he wanted, even if it meant holding a highly decorated black military general at gunpoint at a funeral. The younger officer next to him, Officer Bradley, hesitated, shifting uneasily. His hands twitched near his holster, but he wasn't as quick to raise his weapon. "Sergeant, I don't think," Bradley stammered, his nervous blue eyes darting between Harper and the crowd of horrified soldiers. But Harper didn't hear him. He was fixated, obsessed with the idea that Nathaniel Carter was a threat. Carter exhaled slowly. He had been through 3 wars, countless missions, assassination attempts, bombings, and firefights in the most hostile terrains on Earth. Yet here he was, back on American soil, at the burial of a fallen soldier, being treated like an enemy, not because he had done anything wrong, but because of the color of his skin. The other officers and soldiers present weren't just witnesses, they were stunned spectators to what should have been impossible. They had all served under Carter, had heard his speeches, had followed his commands. Some of them had owed their lives to his leadership, yet none of that seemed to matter to Harper. Carter, his voice dangerously even, finally spoke. "I'll give you one more chance," he said, his tone so calm it felt like a threat. "Lower your weapon." Harper scoffed. "That's not how this works. I give the orders here." Carter's lips barely moved. "No, Sergeant." "You don't?" The weight in those words sent a ripple of unease through everyone standing nearby. Even Officer Bradley was visibly sweating now. He turned to Harper, voice urgent. "Sergeant, sir, I really think we should." "Shut up, Bradley." Harper snapped. His finger twitched on the trigger. The soldiers nearby stiffened, muscles tensing. It wouldn't take much, ***, one wrong move, one panicked breath, one twitch of Harper's finger, ***, and an innocent man would be shot. Carter, however, remained still, his battle-hardened expression unreadable. Then, finally, he spoke again. "What exactly do you think I did?" The question hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Harper sneered, his jaw tightening. "I don't take orders from people like you. This is a military funeral. You're not supposed to be here." The words dripped with unspoken accusations. Carter blinked once. "People like me." Harper didn't back down. He squared his shoulders, still pointing his gun at Carter's chest. "You don't belong here. You were acting suspicious, standing too close to the casket, whispering something." Carter almost laughed. He had spoken a prayer before stepping forward, a prayer, and Harper, seeing a black man standing at the front of a funeral, had immediately assumed something sinister. The other officers were horrified. Harper, however, wasn't finished. "Now, I won't say it again. Get on the ground." That was it. That was the breaking point. Carter's gaze, sharp as a blade, swept over the scene. He didn't move, but suddenly it felt like he was the one in control. His next words changed everything. "Sergeant Harper," he said, his voice a quiet command. "Do you know who you just drew your weapon on?" Harper scoffed. "Doesn't matter. The law is the law." A slow, dangerous smirk spread across Carter's face. "Wrong answer." And with that, the funeral standoff exploded into something Harper never saw coming. For the first time since drawing his weapon, Sergeant Harper hesitated. The arrogance in his face wavered, just a flicker, but it was there. Something in General Nathaniel Carter's tone, in the way he stood unshaken in the face of a loaded gun, made Harper falter, and then the whispers started. The soldiers, the officers, the mourners, everyone at the funeral had begun murmuring amongst themselves. "You don't know who that is." A stunned young lieutenant muttered under his breath. "He's an idiot if he doesn't." Another officer whispered back. Officer Bradley, still standing beside Harper, looked like he wanted to crawl into the nearest grave. His face had gone pale, his jaw clenched so tight it looked painful. He glanced at the soldiers standing behind Carter, men and women in full uniform, their ribbons and ranks making it clear that these weren't just any attendees. This wasn't a random funeral, and General Carter wasn't just some man in a suit. Finally, a voice cut through the murmurs. It was Colonel Davis, a hard-faced woman standing among the honor guard, her uniform adorned with medals and ribbons that demanded respect. She stepped forward, her voice cold and razor-sharp. "Sergeant Harper," she said, "do you realize you're pointing your weapon at a 4-star general?" The moment those words left her mouth, the entire atmosphere shifted. Harper's face twisted in confusion. He scoffed, shaking his head. "Bullshit." Colonel Davis didn't blink. She simply lifted her gloved hand and pointed to the silver stars on Carter's shoulders. The 4 shining insignias that outranked everyone present. It was undeniable. A stunned, strangled noise left Harper's throat. His trigger finger twitched, his knuckles going white. He blinked, as if finally seeing Carter for the first time. General Nathaniel Carter was one of the highest-ranking officers in the United States Army. And Harper had drawn a gun on him in the middle of a military funeral. The color drained from Harper's face. He took a step back, gun still trembling in his hands. His mouth opened as if to speak, but no words came out. Carter, unmoving, let the silence hang in the air. He could see it now, the realization, the horror, the slow, creeping knowledge that Harper had just made a grave mistake. But Carter wasn't done yet. He took a slow step forward, his boots crunching against the damp earth. Harper flinched. "Tell me something, Sergeant," Carter said, his voice steady, sharp as a blade. "When you saw me standing there, minding my own business, paying my respects to a fallen soldier, what exactly did you think I was doing?" Harper opened his mouth, then shut it. Carter took another step forward. Harper took another step back. "I'll answer for you," Carter continued. "You thought I didn't belong. You saw my face, you saw my skin, and you decided I was a threat." Harper's jaw tensed. He swallowed, his lips pressing together into a thin line. Carter's voice grew colder. "You profiled me. You humiliated me. You drew your weapon at a funeral, in front of the very people I've spent my life leading, training, and protecting." Harper couldn't look away. The reality of what he had done was sinking in like lead. And then Carter said something that sent a chill down everyone's spine. "I could have you court-martialed," he said smoothly. "Do you understand that?" Harper visibly paled. The silence was deafening. The other officers, the soldiers, even the widow clutching the folded flag, all of them stood in stunned disbelief at what they were witnessing. And that was when the real weight of consequences came crashing down, because Sergeant Harper was about to realize that his career, his reputation, and his very freedom were all hanging by a thread. Sergeant Harper stood frozen, his gun still trembling in his grip, but his confidence was gone. The arrogance that had fueled his every movement, the blind belief that he was in control, had vanished like smoke in the wind. Court-martialed. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. The military wasn't like the civilian world. Pulling a weapon on a 4-star general wasn't just a mistake. It was an unforgivable act of insubordination, a disgrace that would end a career, strip a man of his rank, and ruin his life. Harper knew it. Everyone at the funeral knew it, and worst of all, there was no way out. Carter took another slow, deliberate step forward. Harper took another step back. The once confident sergeant looked small now. His bravado had shattered under the weight of what he had done. "I don't think you understand just how badly you've miscalculated," Carter said, his voice smooth, authoritative, deadly. Harper's throat bobbed as he swallowed. He finally lowered the gun, but it was too late. The damage was done. One of the soldiers in the crowd, a stern-faced Marine captain, stepped forward and spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "Sergeant, drop your weapon, now." Harper turned, his face contorted in disbelief. "What?" Another officer stepped forward. This time it was Colonel Davis. "That was an order." "Drop it." Harper hesitated, looking between the soldiers, the officers, and the man he had just pointed his gun at. He had lost control. He had spent his entire career believing he was the one in charge. But now he was standing before men and women who outranked him, outclassed him, and were watching his career fall apart in real time. For the first time, his voice wavered. I was just doing my job," Carter scoffed. "Your job," his voice dripped with disdain, "your job is to protect and serve, not profile and terrorize." Harper's grip on his weapon loosened. Then, finally, he let it fall to the ground. The metallic clang as it hit the dirt felt like a gavel slamming down in a courtroom. Officer Bradley, the younger cop, took an unsteady step back, his face pale. Unlike Harper, he looked horrified. Harper turned toward Bradley, as if searching for support. But Bradley couldn't even meet his eyes, because there was no justifying this. The crowd of soldiers and officers stared at Harper like he was already a dead man. And then Carter spoke again. "Sergeant Harper," he said, his tone calm but final, "you're going to answer for what you just did." And that was when everything truly fell apart, because before Harper could even react, 2 MPs stepped forward. Their movements were precise, practiced, military police officers trained to handle situations exactly like this. Harper stiffened. "Wait, no, this isn't. Hands behind your back." Now, Harper flinched. He turned toward Bradley again, but the younger officer had already taken 2 steps away from him. He wasn't going to help him. No one was. Carter didn't say another word. He simply watched, as Sergeant Harper, the man who had drawn his gun without hesitation, was now the one with his hands forced behind his back. The world seemed to slow down as the 2 military police officers grabbed Sergeant Harper's arms, twisting them behind his back with efficient precision. Harper struggled, his face twisting in disbelief. This wasn't supposed to happen. He had always been the one with power, the one giving the orders, the one in control, not the one being subdued, but no one came to his aid. The silence from the surrounding officers, soldiers, and mourners was deafening. "You can't do this," Harper barked, his voice raw with panic. He tried to turn toward the younger cop, Officer Bradley. "Bradley, say something. You saw what happened." Bradley didn't move. His jaw clenched, his hands curled into fists at his sides, but his eyes stayed on the ground, because there was nothing to say. He had seen everything, and so had everyone else. The MP were unshaken as they snapped the cuffs around Harper's wrists. Harper's breath hitched. His face had gone from red to pale, from arrogance to outright fear. "Wait, no, "Sergeant Doug Harper, you are being detained under military jurisdiction." One of the MP spoke coolly, his grip like iron on Harper's arm. Harper's eyes widened in horror. Military jurisdiction, that meant this wouldn't be swept under the rug. This wouldn't be a quiet slap on the wrist. This was going on record. Panic settled in Harper's expression. His breathing quickened. He turned back to Carter, as if finally understanding the true weight of his actions. But Carter was completely unfazed. He stood tall, his four-star uniform crisp and untouched by the chaos around him. His face was unreadable, his dark eyes locked onto Harper with an eerie stillness, because this wasn't even a victory for him. It was just justice taking its course. Harper kept struggling. "This is insane. I was doing my job." A scoff came from behind him. It was Colonel Davis. She folded her arms, her expression one of pure, icy disgust. "Your job," she echoed, her voice sharp. "Your job is to uphold the law, not abuse it." Harper whipped his head toward her, his eyes darting between all the officers present. His voice grew desperate. "This is a mistake. I didn't know who he was. That's not my fault." And there it was. The final, desperate attempt to escape accountability. Not an apology, not even an ounce of remorse, just an excuse. Carter's expression didn't change, but when he finally spoke, his words hit like a hammer. "You didn't need to know who I was." Harper's breath caught. Carter took a calm step forward, staring Harper down. "You needed to recognize that I was a man standing at a funeral, mourning a fallen soldier. That should have been enough, but it wasn't." Harper's lips parted, but nothing came out, because there was nothing to say, and then, the final blow. The second MP, who had been quietly receiving orders through his earpiece, turned toward Harper with an unreadable expression. "Sergeant Harper, you're being placed under arrest." The words hit like a gunshot. Harper's entire body stiffened, his knees nearly buckled. "Arrest? No, wait, I didn't." "On what charges?" Colonel Davis asked coolly, already knowing the answer. The MP response was lethal. Brandishing a weapon without just cause, threatening a superior officer, abuse of power. Unlawful use of force. Harper's face collapsed in horror. Those weren't petty charges. That was career-ending, and worse, that was prison time. His panic exploded. He lunged forward, but the MP yanked him back. "Wait, you can't do this. You can't arrest me for a mistake. I didn't mean to." Carter tilted his head, his voice as sharp as a blade. "Oh, so now it was a mistake. Funny. A moment ago, you were convinced you were doing your job." Harper's face burned with shame, because Carter was right. The reality had finally hit him. This wasn't going away. He wasn't just losing his job. He was losing everything, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Harper's breathing had turned shallow, erratic, a man grasping at the last fraying threads of control. But there were no more lifelines. The two military police officers held him firm, their grip unyielding. His cuffs clanked as he twisted his wrists, the stark contrast between his reality just minutes ago and now crushing him like an avalanche. This was it, the end of everything he thought he could get away with. Wait, just listen." He stammered, his voice rising in desperation. He turned toward Colonel Davis first, then toward Officer Bradley, then finally his wild eyes landed on Carter. "General, sir, please, I—" Carter raised a single hand. Harper went silent. The sheer authority in that small movement shut him down faster than a bullet. Carter stepped closer, his gaze still calm, unreadable. He was neither angry nor triumphant. He simply looked at Harper like he was studying a man who had dug his own grave and only just realized it. And when Carter spoke, his voice was cold, unforgiving. "Now you want to talk?" he asked. Harper's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Carter took another slow step forward. "When you pointed your gun at me, you weren't listening to a word I said. You weren't interested in talking. You were only interested in control." Harper swallowed hard. He had no argument, because it was true. Carter didn't need to yell, didn't need to threaten. His presence alone commanded the moment. "You saw my face, saw my skin, and thought?" "That was all you needed to know," Carter continued, his voice even. "I wasn't a grieving officer. I wasn't a veteran. I wasn't a fellow American. I was just another suspect in your eyes." Harper shuddered. Carter let the silence settle over the funeral like a heavy fog. Then he exhaled slowly and spoke again. "You came here today thinking you had authority. That your gun, your badge, your uniform made you untouchable." He tilted his head. "How's that working out for you now?" Harper winced. His shoulders slumped. The fight in him was dying, because Carter was right. He had thought himself untouchable, had built a life on his power, but now he was powerless. The MP tightened their grip on his arms. Harper flinched. The widow of Major William Daniels, ***, the very man this funeral was for, ***, stood nearby, her eyes still wet with tears, but now, she wasn't just grieving, she was watching, and so was everyone else. They had seen it all, every second of Harper's fall, and there was no coming back from this. Carter exhaled softly, glancing at the officers around him. "Take him away," he said simply. The MP nodded. Harper panicked. Wait, but it was too late. The MP hauled him back. His boots dragged against the damp ground as they marched him toward the patrol car parked just outside the cemetery gates. And just like that, Sergeant Doug Harper, the man who had wielded his power like a weapon, who had drawn his gun without hesitation, was now the one being removed in cuffs. Justice was unfolding before everyone's eyes, and Harper had finally run out of places to hide. Harper dug his heels into the ground, but it was useless. The military police marched him forward, unwavering, their grip like steel. Every step toward the waiting patrol car was a nail in the coffin of his career. "You can't do this," Harper shouted, his voice cracking. "This isn't how it's supposed to go." But no one listened, not Carter, not Colonel Davis, not Officer Bradley, not the dozens of soldiers and officers standing in solemn silence, watching his disgrace unfold. His words meant nothing now, because he had already shown them who he truly was. The ceremony had been disrupted, the funeral desecrated, and the worst part. Harper hadn't even paused before pulling his weapon. He had done it so easily, and now the weight of that choice was finally pressing down on him. The MP hauled him toward the squad car. He twisted in their grip, searching for someone, anyone, who might give him a shred of support. His eyes locked onto Officer Bradley. The young cop was still standing near Carter, frozen, his hands clenched at his sides. Harper desperately latched onto him. "Bradley, say something. You saw what happened. You know I didn't mean anything." Bradley's jaw tensed. He finally looked up, meeting Harper's eyes, and what Harper saw there made his stomach drop. There was no loyalty, no hesitation, only disgust. "I saw everything, Sergeant," Bradley said quietly, and so did everyone else. Harper's breath hitched, because that was it. That was the moment he knew. He had burned every bridge, destroyed any chance at explaining his way out of this. He had done this to himself, and now he was completely alone. The MP finally shoved him into the back of the patrol car. The door slammed shut. Harper's face was ashen. He looked through the window, but no one was looking back at him. He had been erased. The car's engine rumbled to life. The MP got into the front seat, and without another word, the patrol car pulled away from the cemetery. And just like that, he was gone. For a long moment, no one moved. The tension in the air was still thick, the shock of what had just happened settling into the bones of everyone present. Then, slowly, Carter exhaled. He turned back to the casket of Major William Daniels. The folded flag, still clutched in the widow's trembling hands, was streaked with her silent tears, and just like that, everything that mattered came back into focus. Carter adjusted his uniform. Then, in one smooth motion, he knelt. With quiet reverence, he reached out and pressed his palm gently over the casket, whispering something only the fallen soldier could hear. The ceremony had been tainted by racism, by cruelty, by the abuse of power. But Carter would not allow that to be the final memory of this day. He closed his eyes, offering one last silent moment of respect, and then he rose once more. "Resume the honors," he ordered. The honor guard snapped to attention. The bugler stepped forward, lifting his instrument, and with that, the funeral continued. Because no matter what had just happened, the fallen deserved their final salute. The first note of taps rang through the cemetery, somber and slow, carrying through the cool air like a final goodbye. General Nathaniel Carter stood tall once more, his hands clasped behind his back. His gaze remained on the casket, his mind focused solely on the man they were here to honor. Sergeant Harper had tried to strip this moment of dignity, had tried to reduce a decorated general to a suspect, but Carter had refused to let him win. The real victory wasn't in Harper's fall. It was in this moment, a soldier being honored with the dignity he deserved. Somewhere beyond the cemetery gates, Sergeant Doug Harper sat in the back of a patrol car, his world crumbling around him. The weight of the handcuffs around his wrists wasn't just physical, it was the weight of his own decisions, of the life he had just destroyed. His mind raced. Would he be dishonorably discharged, imprisoned, sued, stripped of his badge, his pension, his reputation? The uncertainty made his chest tighten with panic. But one thing was clear. He was never going to wear that uniform again. Back at the cemetery, the final note of taps faded into silence. The folded flag, now handed over to the widow, rested in her lap like a sacred artifact. Her fingers traced its edges, her tears still fresh, but her expression no longer one of devastation. It was one of pride. Carter watched her for a moment before turning to leave. As he did, Colonel Davis fell into step beside him. "That was a disgrace," she muttered under her breath, glancing toward the gates where Harper had been taken away. Carter nodded. Yes, it was. She frowned. "What happens now?" Carter exhaled. "What's supposed to?" His gaze stayed forward, unshaken, unmoved. "The system will handle Harper. His career is over. He'll face the same justice he's denied to others." Davis scoffed. "Too little, too late." Carter finally stopped walking and turned to face her. "Maybe, but that's not my concern any more." Davis blinked, taken aback. "It's not." Carter's gaze swept over the rows of headstones, the thousands of lives given in service to a country that still, after all these years, had moments like today. "No," he said. "My concern is making sure people like him don't ruin what men like Daniels fought for." Davis let out a slow breath, nodding, and with that, Carter walked away, leaving the weight of today behind him, because while Harper had fallen, the real battle wasn't with him. It was with the next Harper, the next abuse of power, and Carter wasn't done fighting, not by a long shot. 3 days later, the news broke. Sergeant Doug Harper has officially been relieved of duty and dishonorably discharged from the force following an internal investigation. He faces multiple charges, including unlawful use of force and abuse of power. If convicted, he could face significant prison time. Carter watched the news in silence before clicking off the TV. He had seen enough. Harper's fate no longer mattered, because justice had already been served, and Carter, he had more work to do.